What's better than listening to the 4:30 movie? Seeing it recorded in front of a live audience. Join us this year at WonderCon, where your favorite 4:30 movie hosts will record Walt Disney Week live in Anaheim. We hope to see you there at WonderCon.
Back in the 70s and 80s, before the advent of VHS, chances are if you saw a classic movie, it was on the 4:30 movie. With their famous theme weeks, it was a chance to see movies you'd never seen before and get reacquainted with some old classics. So now, join us for the 4:30 movie.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, and this is IDES of March Week. IDES of March Week? Are we too cool for school?
Well,
what does that mean?
What's we?
What is we?
Well, I am.
We're actually talking about Shakespeare movies because, of course, we're in the Ides of March right now, and we're going to be talking about Shakespeare. Shakespeare, of course, was the great British playwright, William Shakespeare.
He made a lot of movies back in the 17th century.
You may know him as the man who provided the basis of the Baz Luhrmann Leonardo DiCaprio film. But no, we're really excited because this is a chance to discuss an interesting genre of film. Shakespeare has fascinated filmmakers from the very dawn of the medium and continues to fascinate filmmakers to this day. And of course, one of the great storytellers in in history, only second to Ashley E. Miller, the screenwriter of Thor and X-Men First Class. But we're really, I think this should be an interesting week for us here.
Or as we like to call it, 6 Degrees of Francis Bacon.
Wow.
Darren Docterman for the win.
You can just drop the mic.
Now, I just want to say that we've talked about this, and we do feel that Shakespeare is best experienced on the stage, and so we're gonna thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
No, actually, there've been some amazing Shakespeare movies. Let me ask you, because the plays are obviously a very different thing than the movies.
Well, the
Play is a thing.
Darren Docterman!
And actually at the same time.
A three-pointer from the outside corner. Steve Melching, what's your favorite Shakespeare play?
Oh boy, I really like Romeo and Juliet. I think it's a great story.
Can't go wrong with Romeo and Juliet, that's for sure. What about you, Darren?
I have to say, I think it might be it's a close one between the Scottish play and Hamlet. I like them both.
Yeah.
And also Midsummer Night's Dream is fun, too. So, I don't know. I would probably have to go with Hamlet.
I have to tell you, it's really funny. You mentioned Midsummer Night's Dream. I did recently. The Actors Studio, which is in Culver City, they do kids matinees sometimes in Culver City. They did, and it was absolutely delightful. They did Marvel: A Do About Nothing, and they did the play with Marvel characters.
Yeah.
And they had Thanos, and they had Iron Man, and they did it with unrequited love between Scarlet Witch, and it was and I have to say,
Scarlet Witch dresses up like Hawkeye.
it was so entertaining and so much fun. We had a great time, and it was a great way to introduce kids to Shakespeare. I remember
Much Ado is a great one.
Yeah,
that's a great one.
And I first saw Shakespeare. I think the first thing, it was like in third grade. We went to see a Macbeth in Connecticut. A school trip, way over my head. All I could think of, and this is what I loved about it. I'm like, wow, that's from Catspaw.
Right.
The three witches in the Star Trek episode Catspaw. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Shakespeare's ripping off Star Trek.
Yeah, right.
No, I didn't quite think that, but it was. It was a little above my head. But it was a great, early exposure to the works of William Shakespeare. What about you? What's your favorite Shakespeare play?
Look, I love many of them. My favorite, I think, head and shoulders, is probably Hamlet. That's on some level maybe the easy answer, but on another level, kind of the most difficult play. I've read it again and again and again and again.
Tomorrow and tomorrow
and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it's such a rich plethora of plays to choose from, and then also so many movies and TV shows that have been made about Shakespeare,
and so many ones that have sections of Shakespeare in them.
Yeah. I just want you to know, Darren, this is for you, that Batman 66 does not qualify just because Bruce Wayne had a bust of Shakespeare in his study.
I disagree, but I'll go along.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Batman 66 was in Superhero Week, so it's disqualified. Okay, well, great. Well, we're going to be talking about Shakespeare movies here on the Ides of March week. And as always, Monday, we're going to start with Steve Melching as we curate a fantasy theme week of classic film.
Well, films based on... I was looking at this as films based on the works of Shakespeare, and of course there's no shortage of those. I probably no writer has been ripped off or inspirational to more, he's just absolutely iconic. It doesn't need to be said. So I'm going to pick a movie that was many years in development and actually didn't start life as a Shakespeare adaptation. It started as an adaptation of an old parable from feudal Japan that Akira Kurosawa was working on about a warlord who has to divide his kingdom among his three sons. And as he was developing this movie and painting something like 10,000 storyboards all through the 70s, he started reading King Lear, and King Lear became a major influence on the screenplay. And so, of course, I'm talking about Ron from 1985. To this day, I watched it last week to prepare for this, and I think it's one of the most gorgeous movies ever made. It is absolutely stunningly photographed and edited, and I think that's a testament to the care that Akira Kurosawa put into his visuals, by virtue of painting those thousands of storyboards and doing this incredible location work, in the mountains there, and shooting at some real castles and then constructing some other castles on the volcanic black slopes of Mount Fuji, and having something like 1,400 handmade costumes for the soldiers, and in the sort of color-coded banners and everything, and literally a cast of thousands, and it's just I find it just a monumental feat of filmmaking. It's just such a great story about greed and envy and ego and jealousy and vengeance and stubbornness, all those core human qualities that we can all relate to that were so key to Shakespeare's work. And he put it together in this, it's so poetic watching these battle scenes where you're just seeing these rivers of soldiers moving through frame, and phalanxes of soldiers on horseback, and the spears and the banners and the smoke and the arrows flying. It's absolutely breathtaking to me, and it has a wonderfully moody score under it all. And the film was rightfully nominated for 4 Academy Awards, nominated for Best Director, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, and Costumes, and it won for Costumes. I would have given it to all 4. I just love this movie.
I think you'll get no argument from us. I'm a big Kurosawa fan. I love High and Low and Seven Samurai and Throne of Blood. But Ron was very late in his career. He was much older, and it's his version of King Lear, and it's just sensational. It really is it's a great choice. It's and that's the great thing about the I think we'll see over this Ides of March week how many different interpretations and how elastic Shakespeare is, because we're going to see a lot of different, not traditional interpretations of Shakespeare, and Ron is one of the most untraditional and just great epic in the David Lean tradition. It's a wonderful, wonderful film and a wonderful version of King Lear.
Yeah, of course, Kurosawa was no stranger to adapting Shakespeare. He had done it before. But this one, I think this is his masterpiece. It's my personal favorite of all of his films, and I can watch it again and again and be just mesmerized by it.
Yeah, wholeheartedly. Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's a great
If
one.
you can see this on the biggest screen possible, do so. It's a feast for the eyes.
It's interesting to me that there hasn't really been a successful big screen direct adaptation of King Lear. I mean, I sort of get why. It's enormously. I mean, you talk about the tragedies and how dark they can be. It is enormously dark. It is relentlessly dark. It is perhaps the bleakest play he ever wrote. I mean, Titus Andronicus is a slasher movie. But Lear just cuts the guts out of you, and really leaves you with like no sense of really any hope at all. I mean, now Ron was not a direct adaptation; it was an interpretation, right? It was heavily influenced by the story.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so bleak because it's a family story. It's a father and his three sons. And
but not like Fred McMurray.
No. And how this family, he wants to, the warlord wants to retire basically and divide his kingdom, return his lands over to his sons, and the youngest son is the truth teller. It's like, this is not going to work. This is not going to end well. And for his honesty, he's sort of banished from the family, and sure enough, the two brothers turn on each other and on the father, and there's the manipulating wife who is seeking revenge for the destruction of her family by the warlord. And, it doesn't end well for anybody. I mean, everybody dies. Spoiler alert, everybody dies in this. It's so bleak.
It really is. It's very
tragic,
dark.
and some of them deserve it, and some of them maybe don't.
Yeah. No, it's a great choice. It's a great movie.
Hi.
It's alas, Darren Doctorman. I knew him well. Darren, on Tuesday, where's your head at on IDES of March week?
I am. I'm going to go in this direction. In 1990. There was an adaptation of a Tom Stoppard play that was directed by Tom Stoppard.
Yeah. Okay.
And it is the Back to the Future 2 of Shakespeare.
Oh, that's funny.
It is the Lower Decks. It is the Red Shirts. Yeah. It is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, starring Gary Oldman, Tim Roth, with a supporting performance by Richard Dreyfuss as the leader of the actor troupe that goes through Hamlet. And it is so clever and witty and fun and and mysterious and wacky. It follows these two secondary characters that we see once in the play in Hamlet, and we follow what happens to them during the entire play. And they are going in and out of scenes that, as the play is happening over here, off to the side, we're following them and their horrible fate that awaits them. I mean, not like everyone in the play Hamlet doesn't have a horrible fate, but it is so well done and so clever, and it is just magical. And, Roth and Gary Oldman are just great.
When have they ever not been great?
Well, Tim Roth was kind of goofy in Planet of the Apes.
Okay. Oh, fair enough. Okay. Yep, I'll accept that answer.
But it's just marvelous, and it's an interesting sort of side view at something that we all sort of know by rote from what we've been exposed to. I mean, I'm sure that none of us can quote the entire play of Hamlet, but we know what happens in it, and this gives us such a fun little side view at something that I would love to see with other subjects. I would love to see, famous shows shown from the point of view of other characters in it. That's just such a fun.
What about Bewitched from the standpoint of Gladys Kravitz?
Right, exactly,
dude.
Was that the first play or story that really did that sort of thing, that went into an existing story from a completely different perspective?
If there is, I don't know of it.
I mean,
but
it's brilliant.
It's
absolutely brilliant, and it's been imitated many times, including by myself to some extent. Mark Altman, for a time, had a magazine called Sci-Fi Universe, and me and a couple friends were going to do a comic strip for it, and our premise for the comic strip was looking at these sort of minor characters from the Star Wars universe and follow them through the parallel events of the Star Wars movies. But these characters are ones that always died in the movie, so the last panel is always them dying horribly. The first one was Tales of the Death Star scanning crew, and we followed those two guys as they went about their daily chores on the Death Star and then get summoned to Docking Bay 94 or the hangar 327 and go into the Millennium Falcon, and suddenly a Wookiee jumps out and
rips their head off,
pulverizes them. And another one was the Stormtroopers looking for R2 and 3PO on Tatooine and following them to Docking Bay 94, where Han Solo shoots them. And, of course, that story became the basis for the famous Star Wars fan film Troops.
Right.
Weren't you also going to do Tractor Bay Technicians, the guys who were guarding the tractor beam?
Yeah.
And that they were going to die in the Death Star explosion?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we had a whole bunch of those.
I remember that. That's great.
But like you mentioned Back to the Future too. I mean, obviously, the same thing where you're taking characters back into
the story that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
But it's taking it off in a direction that is vastly different from what you're used to.
It's funny you mention Star Wars in the context of this particular movie and Tom Stoppard, who I was briefly, my radar went ding, with some excitement for Attack of the Clowns. Whoops, did I say that out loud? For Attack of the Clones, because Tom Stoppard was evidently going to be participating in writing the screenplay, and I thought, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
And no.
It was not to be.
Well, and I will say this, look, it's no secret I'm not a fan of the prequels, and we're not going to have that debate here. I know Steve is. But there's the one scene I actually like in Revenge of the Sith is that scene in the opera between Palpatine and Hayden Christensen. And that was written by Tom Stoppard.
No, it was not.
Was not?
That's not true.
It's apocryphal. That's apocryphal. Well, you know what? I defer to you. You would clearly know. I'd always heard that, but if you say it's not true,
that was a very popular story.
Then I believe. But I still love the scene.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
But I will not talk about it anymore.
I love that movie so much, and I think it's a great story in and of itself. I mean, you can watch it without having to understand Hamlet. It's not inside baseball. It lets you into the world, and it's really about something. It's about more than just kind of, okay, this is the background. It's these characters become aware of the fact that they are bit players in someone else's story, not in a meta way, but just in a we have no real agency, and what is this about, and what meaning does any of this have for us? And I love their interplay, like the tennis game, when they're going, it could have been a sports movie,
right?
It's brilliant, and it's funny, and it just goes like that.
Beware the Ides of March. And beware the suggestion from Ashley Miller, because we have come to him.
Beware the Beast Man.
And Ram Man.
So we're at Wednesday. We've had two very interesting, and when I say untraditional, I don't mean bad. I mean, when you think of Shakespeare, you think of straight up faithful adaptations. Neither of them are, like we said, it's inspired by King Lear, but it's not King Lear. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Very different take by Tom Stoppard on that story. So now we come to you, Ashley, always thinking outside the box. I'm very curious to hear what you're going to say.
Today on this podcast, I throw a fastball straight down the middle. And I want to talk about a film that actually changed my life. It changed the course of my life. So when I was in high school...
Bad News Bears Go to Japan.
Yes, which, by the way, I kind of dig.
Based on Richard III, oddly.
Yes.
Who knew?
Yes. In fact, dialogue is ripped straight from that play. In high school and through about half of college, I resisted Shakespeare. I didn't like reading it. I didn't like talking about it. It bored me. I think part of the reason
vegetables.
It bored me. Yeah, it's vegetables.
It's a great analogy, right?
Vegetables, right? There was no dessert to it. Later, when I became a teacher and I was doing my student teaching and all that, and I had to teach Julius Caesar, I realized what had planted that idea in my head. It was Julius Caesar's fault. The reason why Julius Caesar gets taught so much is because Julius Caesar has no in it. There's no sex, right? So it's acceptable for a general audience, but it's a sort of a serious play. So that's neither here nor there. I thought that Shakespeare was boring. I thought that Shakespeare was all sort of hoity-toity and heady, and I just didn't care. I mean, I'm the guy I love Howard the Duck.
Yeah, well, people think of it as tights.
Yes.
Yeah. Men in tights, you know.
And declaiming and all of these things, and that there's no blood to it. So one night, I'm sitting around. It's like my first junior year in college, and I'm watching movies with my friends, and one of my friends brings home a movie directed by this guy named Kenneth Branagh.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Henry V.
Yep.
And he put it in.
Like, I haven't seen Henry 1 through 4 yet.
Right? Do I have to see the other movies?
Henry V Strikes Back.
Right. And
that was my original choice.
was it
before
really?
Rosencrantz?
I would have applauded it. And,
Yeah.
I mean, Ken gives this performance that is so human, that is so perfect.
And real.
And real. He internalizes the dialogue. He's not just declaiming it. He is saying it. It's happening. It's real and it's vital.
And the asides that he gives to himself are so good.
So good. So good. He sells it. And he makes really smart adaptation choices. Like, I didn't even appreciate when I first watched it because I didn't know. Like, pulling scenes from Henry IV Part 2. Like, understanding that, that
all of
Henry
it was
V
related.
that he used to be Hal, this feckless prince. And how he had to show that he was more than that. And how this movie is really, it's a coming of age story for him. It's about him, this collision with reality. And I saw this and it blew my mind. Yeah. The day before I saw that film, I was a government major. The day after I saw that film, I was an English major. I went and I took every Shakespeare class, every Renaissance lit class that I could possibly take. There was a professor that was in the English department who was very difficult, who was...
Kingsfield.
Yes, he was basically Kingsfield. His name was Peter Wiggins, and he was enormously difficult, and I loved him. He was so challenging, and he just made it all seem so great and so vital. And it was at that moment, kind of seeing, there was something about Henry V and how amazing that film was. Not just activating me in terms of really loving Shakespeare, but also activating me as a writer. I always knew that I wanted to be a writer of some kind, but...
Did you tell Kenneth Branagh?
Well, I was just going to say, the story has incredible payoff, because here you're talking about how Henry V really changed your life, that film in particular, and then 10, 15 years later, 20 years later, you're working with Kenneth Branagh on Thor.
Yes.
That's remarkable.
Yes. So that's the punchline, right? Because I'm in this business. I'm doing this job in part because I am so moved by what I've seen, right? And I remember, I will never forget when we were trying to get the job for Thor. There was a whole host of reasons why we were even in consideration. And I went in to read the original 3 million page outline they had for their 18-hour miniseries that didn't have a third act, and just kind of get a sense of it, right? And I spent 45 minutes reading, and they asked me if I wanted to come back and talk about it a little bit. So I go back and to talk about it a little bit. And I think it's just me and it's the Marvel executives, and someone starts speaking, and I went, I know that voice.
I know that voice.
I know that voice. I know that well. And it's Kenneth Branagh, and he's wearing a T-shirt, jeans, he's got Chucks on, he's got his feet kicked up. And I go, oh my, I didn't even notice him until he opened his mouth. And then suddenly it was Kenneth Branagh. And it was just one of those moments where you doubt your own reality, where like nothing really makes sense. And working with him was just one of the highlights of my life.
Next to doing this podcast.
The best moment. So this is the thing that if nothing else happened to me in my career that was good, this would be the thing that would make it all okay. Towards the end of the Thor development process, we were in draft number 5 or 6 or something like that, and Ken would go through the script page by page, each draft, and read it. And sometimes he would read things out loud, right? So he would want to read the scene. I'll be Thor and you be Jane. And I'm like, okay. And he would do a one-man show that was very funny of the movie that was amazing. But the best moment was we were kind of rounding the last sort of quarter pole on the third act of Thor and kind of working it out. And it had been important to all of us. And one of the reasons why we got the job was because we really leaned into the family tragedy of it all, and how this was a story about these two brothers who loved each other very much and loved their father, but interpreted his wishes very differently. We were talking about kind of how to wrap all of this stuff up, and I will never forget sitting in this conference room in the Marvel offices that were in
Manhattan Beach.
Yeah, in Manhattan Beach, and we're at a conference table. And I also remember I'm not making this up, there were 2 ravens that were like outside.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And Ken, as he was wont to do, had his feet kicked up, and he starts talking about Hamlet. And he says, I have been trying to understand that play for 30 years. And I have wondered all this time, his soliloquy, what it means. And it's taken me all of this time to finally begin to understand it. And he connects it to the moment after Laertes comes in and he says, hey, Hamlet, here's the deal. You're a dick. You killed my dad, you made my sister crazy, and she killed herself. Everything around you turns to shit. I hate you, and in front of everyone, I'm going to kick your ass up one side and down the other.
What are we talking about?
That's a direct quote from Shakespeare.
That is absolutely a direct quote.
Go sit on an egg.
Go sit on an egg. And he leaves, and Hamlet kind of turns to Horatio, and he says, he's kind of right. But he says more than that, right? He gives this whole speech, which ends with the punchline, let be. Just let be. So Ken is trying to lay this out, and he goes into the speech. This was the remarkable moment. He obviously has all of the dialogue, all of the lines memorized, but he doesn't recite it. He doesn't say it. He doesn't perform it. He just is. Yeah. Hamlet. And he's looking at me, and I'm Horatio, and he's Hamlet, and he's just saying all of these things. And he finishes, and I burst into tears.
That's great.
I burst into tears. So Henry V will always occupy a very special place in my heart.
That's such an incredible story. And it's funny, not that I had that kind of experience with Kenneth Branagh by any means, but I did have that kind of experience with Henry V, where I was not, I admired the storytelling in Shakespeare, but didn't particularly enjoy the language, the verb, just it's work. It was home. It always felt like homework. And then I saw Henry V, his brilliant adaptation, and it changed the whole thing. I became very interested in Shakespeare. I was much more open to it. It's so brilliant, and it was such a gateway drug to Shakespeare.
Yep, totally agree.
It's a remarkable movie. I'm so glad that you mentioned it, and that, as we're all film music fans, that Patrick Doyle score is magnificent.
Yep.
For that film, and he's done Shakespeare adaptations later, and at the time he was really the enfant terrible of the stage. They were saying this is the next second coming of Orson Welles, because Orson Welles, of course, had made a name for himself doing Shakespeare, with the Mercury Theater and everything else, and then he did Cain, and later on would do a lot of Shakespeare adaptations, and everyone sort of compared. He's British, he's erudite, he's like Orson Welles, but of course he was nothing like Orson Welles.
Right.
Just remarkable, and that's just an incredible story, because of course Thor is such a Shakespearean story,
he was perfectly cast as the director of that film,
and that was probably very intentional. I imagine.
I went, oh my God, perfect, perfect.
Yeah, you can see that. Whereas Joe Johnston, for instance, would not have been the right guy for Thor, where he was the right guy for Captain America. So really
a wonderful film. I remember going to see that at the Beverly Center, and it was in their smallest theater. It was a shoebox, tiny.
I think that's
shoebox.
exactly where I saw it too.
Yeah, there was maybe 6 rows of seats or something, but it was riveting.
Yeah.
I was not familiar with the play. But I had heard, heard about this Kenneth Branagh guy. I hear it's a great film, so I went in cold to see it, and it was tremendous.
Shakespeare had never lived
Yeah.
for me before that.
I have to say, and this is total aside, I've seen movies in a lot of bad theaters in my life. Been in a lot of bad theaters. I've been in theaters with rats on the floor. I've been in really bad, all around the world. There's probably no worse theater than the Beverly Center was. Rest in peace.
Right.
There was a point at which it was too few theaters to begin with, and they chopped them up into even less. Right. And it's like you'd almost feel like they just put a wall through the middle of the theater, like half a screen.
The wall went through a chair.
It was so awful, and there was so much sound coming through
from
the
surrounding
from the other theaters. I mean, it was no surprise when the Beverly Center closed those awful theaters. And we talk about how times are with everything that's going on in the world, but the one thing that has improved is movie theaters.
Oh, it's night and day. Growing up in the 70s and 80s with those almost no rake to the auditorium.
Yes.
Oh my God,
terrible mono sound, scratchy prints.
Because we missed the heyday of the movie palaces from like the 40s and those incredible giant pre-television auditoriums. They all, at least in Brooklyn, had all become churches by the time I was a kid. But then you have like these duplexes that all became quads. And they were awful and terrible sound, terrible sound bleeding in. But then the 90s, you start to have these movie chains like ArcLight and everybody else, and it's just the exhibition has been revolutionized in the last 10 years.
You can thank George Lucas for some of that with the THX program and his pushing digital cinema and wanting to make the best possible movie-going experience so that it reflects the director's vision as closely as possible.
No, I think, look, we're all indebted to George Lucas for so much. 3 awful movies do not excuse the fact that he is, responsible for just changing cinema and everything he did, not just on the screen, but behind the scenes. I mean, he's a remarkable, creative, brilliant man.
I just love being able to go to a theater. Now I can book my seat in advance, and there's stadium seating and, incredible sound, perfect picture.
You can get somebody to bring you a drink.
Yes.
I mean, it's so funny you say that, because I was explaining to my kids, and I don't think they quite understood how
you used to stand
we would
in
get
line.
online for a movie hours in advance to get good seats,
seat.
To get that good seat, and not be sitting in the front row.
But it could be ruined in a heartbeat if someone sits in front of you who's really tall or has a hat or big hair or something.
Or getting turned away because they were sold out. Because you would do that. You would get online and wait online for hours, and then they tell you, oh, we're sold out. Sorry. Or not even sorry. Just we're sold out. Right. You can come to the next show in 3 hours.
Right.
And it was like...
And stand in that line over there.
So we're so lucky that we have this ability to go online and buy tickets and pick our seats, back when we were kids, it was rough being a kid back in the day. So yes. Okay. So
Henry V.
Great choice. Obviously, it was on my list. Great choices so far all across the board. As we get to Thursday, I would say
Thor's Day.
Thursday. To be or not to be? That is the question that Christopher Plummer asked in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. You know what? I'm not going to do that. I think it's legit. Nick Meyer put so much Shakespeare in Star Trek VI, so much superfluous Shakespeare. And of course, the great story about Nick Meyer was he used to listen to these records of Christopher Plummer performing Shakespeare. Right. And he said, wouldn't it be wonderful if I just had him with me to recite Shakespeare all day? And so he went to his casting director, Mary Jo Slater, and said, I want Christopher Plummer for General Chang, and then I could just have him recite Shakespeare to me all the time. And that's how Christopher Plummer got cast in Star Trek VI.
We can't allow that to be in there because you know why? That opens the gate for the last action hero and Arnold Schwarzenegger in Hamlet.
Yes. Okay.
To be or not to be.
Not to be.
Not to be.
Fair enough. And look, obviously, had Forbidden Planet not been part of in the Shadow of Star Trek week, I would have probably leaned towards that adaptation of The Tempest. I had a couple of things I really love Joss Whedon's adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing. Which is great, and I admire the chutzpah of it. It was made for virtually no money at his house, with a bunch of friends like Nathan Fillion and a ton of Buffy actors. And
what year was that one?
I don't know.
It was in the last
10. Yeah, it was like in the last 10 years. It was like right when he was doing Cabin in the Woods or something. Now, I know you look at me, and I'm sure Steve's thinking this. He's going to go with Woody Allen's Midsummer Night's Sex comedy. He's going to go, don't do it. And I have to say, as much as you know that I love to find Woody Allen, just to remind people of how many brilliant movies Woody Allen has made. This is not one of them.
Good.
So Jose Ferrer and Mia Farrow in Midsummer Night's Sex comedy, not going to make my list. The film that I feel really good about nominating for Thursday, it's a very faithful adaptation, but with a twist, of Richard III, Ian McKellen, in sort of a Nazi-fied, it's the Man in the High Castle version, sort of Nazi Germany and England with Ian McKellen as Richard III. And it has a sensational cast. And, for people who only know Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, and maybe as Chaplin, he's third billed in Richard III. He plays Rivers. He's amazing in it. Annette Bening is amazing in it. And it's but Ian McKellen, I mean, we say tour de force. He's brilliant as Richard III. And I love him as Gandalf. I love him as Magneto. But I think one of my favorite performance ever of Ian McKellen's is in Richard III.
There is no one equal today. Maybe Branagh in some roles, but McKellen owns every role that he played in Shakespeare, specifically. I remember seeing a PBS special back in '81, perhaps, called Ian McKellen Acting Shakespeare. And it's him standing with a studio audience. He's basically standing on a platform, and he's going through various soliloquies and sections of Shakespeare's works and giving them a life that was amazing in the space of like an hour. And it's up on YouTube, I think. Find it. It is amazing and revolutionary to see him at the height of his power. Truly.
To explain, his technique, it's all, Sir Ian. You shall not pass. Sir Ian.
Our second reference to extras.
We keep referring. I don't think we referred to extras on the show. I think we were joking around between before the recording session where we were talking about Patrick Stewart, another great Shakespearean actor.
Yes.
And of course. Just a brilliant actor, Sir Patrick Stewart. But we were talking about his performance in extras as well. So yeah, my pick is Richard III. It was released by MGM during one of the 9 people that owned them in the 90s, and it didn't get much of a wide release. I do believe I went to see it at the Beverly Center. I mercifully may have seen it at the Beverly Connection, which was a slightly better.
Or maybe Century City.
I don't think I did, but maybe it's possible.
Because those theaters ran the small indie movies.
Yeah. But the theaters in Century City were pretty good. Cineplex Odeon, those were pretty good. Free Enterprise played there. Phantom Menace played there. They had some good screens. So it was good. But yeah, Richard III's my pick for Thursday.
That's a terrific movie. I remember seeking it out in, was it 95 when that came out, and just being, I mean, it's just a beautiful looking film. Simple, but just a tremendous performance.
Well, I liked it. It had to be simple.
What I appreciate about that movie, as I am recalling it, is it didn't stretch to make kind of the adaptation choice in terms of the setting. Like it didn't try to make the dialogue in some way contemporary with that. It just played that story. It adapted the play straight, and it used just that setting, that Nazi setting, to just make it very different and give it its own visual identity, which I think was just kind of brilliant.
But Richard Loncraine, the writer, directed it, who I've been accused of looking like on occasion for some reason. I don't know why. And he did just a great job. I love that milieu. I mean, I just love when Shakespeare is taken out of the Elizabethan England set. They've been so many movies where, maybe it's put in a contemporary setting, or it's put in space, or it's put in this case, it was Nazi Germany. And it's so perfect for Richard III. And
which is completely appropriate because, remember, when the plays were originally performed, they were as pop culture. They were the popcorn entertainment.
That's right.
They were the MCU of Elizabethan
Shakespeare
England.
was writing for the cheap seats.
Correct.
I like to say that if Shakespeare were alive today, he would essentially be Shane Black. Here's a guy he wants to entertain people, and he writes incredibly smart dialogue about incredibly interesting characters, and he just kind of lets it go. The thing that Shakespeare had really going for him, among other than enormous talent, simply just having that troupe, and that ability just, to write these plays and rewrite and perform and sort of see how they work and rewrite. I mean, it's easy to imagine that these things sprung fully formed from his head, but they didn't. They were reworked and revised. My God, and how many of them were remakes?
Right.
Hamlet is a remake.
That's correct.
It's arguably it's a remake of Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, Horatio's.
Right.
But it's not just that. There are these stories that are very primal that people knew, and he made them relevant and present, and kind of really gave them something that the Elizabethan audience could connect to. And as it turns out, when they were performed correctly, when they were taken out of the hands of professors and teachers and dramatists who over-intellectualize this crap,
it was
just
intended
grabs you
to
by the
teach
guts.
the masses history.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was the oral tradition of telling the stories of your forefathers.
See, I'm really struck by what Ashley said about Shakespeare being the Shane Black of his time. I would love to have seen Shakespeare write The Predator. If thou is bleed, we Kenneth
kind of did.
slay him.
Yeah, he kind of did, man. It's like, look, not everything Shakespeare did was awesome. The Henry VI plays are just not good. They simply are not. But so much of what was special about him was he was great with comedy, he was great with tragedy, he was great with history.
Okay. But, I mean, I said Thursday. Can I say, because this relates to what you're saying, my guilty pleasure suggestion for Friday, I know it's a different week, is Titus Andronicus, which is his slasher play, which is loathed by most Shakespeare scholars. But Julie Taymor made a terrific film adaptation called Titus with Anthony Hopkins that I love. I love it. And that would be one of my suggestions for Friday.
I actually dig Titus Andronicus, but yeah.
But you're twisted and weird.
Yeah, I know.
You mentioned the more recent version of Much Ado About Nothing. I would go to the Branagh version of Much Ado because it is so good.
Yep,
it's second only to Henry V in my estimation of adaptations. But the cast that he brought together is ginormous and amazing. even Keanu Reeves in it is really good. And I think if you can find it, and the score is amazing as well.
I hadn't even thought about the Keanu Reeves angle of it all, but I realize now that was 93, and whatchamacallit, Bram Stoker's Dracula was, 92, 93, and it's amazing the difference. Like, it's like they're two different actors.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Well, it's interesting because, look, we've talked in the past about how much we all love Dangerous Liaisons, and Keanu Reeves has a supporting role in that, and he is probably one of the weakest elements of that movie. And I love Keanu Reeves now. I love the John Wick films. I love him in a lot of movies, obviously in The Matrix, but he's terrible in Dangerous Liaisons. So, yeah, there was a period where he was not, he was the dude, and you couldn't really see him in a serious role.
In what roles he's cast.
Yes. Also, I don't know that anybody would say that Ken's strength is as a visual stylist. I don't think even he would tell you that. And even though I think his movies look beautiful, what he is amazing at is he directs every single performance. There is no one who speaks on his set that has a role that is too small. Even people who don't have anything to say, who simply act and perform, that the camera. I mean, he just directs very specifically, as if they're the most important person on the set.
That's really funny because that's what I think all the great directors did in the golden age of Hollywood in the 30s and 40s, particularly in those screwball comedies. Even like the butler who would come in for like 3 lines, they would cast them just so impeccably well.
Yeah.
And every role mattered, and we used to say that when we were doing Free Enterprise, for every role we said, you may have 5 lines, but to us, it's like those classic movies where every role is important and has to be impeccably cast. And speaking of Free Enterprise, another choice for Friday, and I don't want to be the one to mention my own movie, but Free Enterprise, No Tears for Caesar. Shakespeare does his one-man show of Julius Caesar. Stab himself in the back.
Just going to sit still for that.
Yeah, what are you going to have to stab yourself in the back? I've done it before. I would mention Joss Whedon's Much Ado About Nothing, which I think is really great. I can't believe we haven't mentioned Baz Luhrmann's.
Well, I was going to say, I think for me that's the only choice for Friday. Baz Luhrmann's adaptation of Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, where it brought that play to life so vibrantly. I absolutely love that movie, and it made DiCaprio a superstar. The use of music in it, the visuals, the way he sort of the milieu that he set it, that Luhrmann adapted it into, just I just absolutely love that movie.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, there are a couple of films we didn't mention. There's Orson Welles' adaptations, including Othello. Roman Polanski's wonderful low-budget adaptation of Macbeth, which I think is terrific. So there are a lot of other films, and again,
Kurosawa's Throne of Blood.
Absolutely.
Looking for Richard. An interesting little movie with
Al Pacino.
Al Pacino, the Shakespeare guy.
The Shakespeare guy. Now, let me tell you, this is a true story.
Okay.
So, speaking of Pacino,
yes.
So, back when Star Trek Generations first came out, we heard the story from a mutual friend. It's true. He was at Pacino's house, and Pacino would watch, Bel Air Prince every weekend. And he was people don't know this. He's a big Star Trek fan, Pacino, and they were watching Generations. And this, of course, was the film that famously united William Shatner and Patrick Stewart and Pacino was getting so fed up watching the movie, he started sort of narrating it. So the big climax, where they're fighting on the bridge and it collapses when they're fighting Thoron, and it's like Pacino starts going. He goes, "Shatner's twice the man of the Shakespeare guy." The Shakespeare guy is like, everything hurts him. He's so, he can't do anything. He's so ineffectual. Shatner, it takes a mountain to kill Kirk. A mountain. That endeared me to Al Pacino forever when I heard that story.
Oh, my God.
I was lucky enough to tell Shatner that story on the set of Free Enterprise, and I must admit he enjoyed it.
That's so great. Oh, Screaming Al.
Screaming Al.
Of crazy.
It's an interesting movie. It's about it's Al Pacino.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Star Trek Generations.
No one would ever argue that. It's a great movie.
I personally, I'm very partial to the Franco Zeffirelli Hamlet. I think it's excellent. I think that Mel Gibson is actually amazing as Hamlet.
Yeah.
He gives probably my favorite performance, and this is even stacked up against, I mean, Ken did Hamlet a few years later, and I don't think it was as good.
Right.
Because I think that that what Mel Gibson was doing was just so like from the guts, man. It was so visceral, and even though he was a little too old to play the part, frankly, so is Ken. People forget or don't realize that Hamlet is very young.
Yeah.
He's basically he's not much more than a teenager. He's maybe 20.
Maybe 20. Yeah.
But you just felt it in his performance. It just it's so feral and it's so awesome, and it just makes it real. And watching that reminds me why I love that play so much.
Yeah. I really think Joss Whedon is a surprisingly astute adapter of Shakespeare. I really enjoyed Much Ado About Nothing. I thought he did a great job with no money, and I thought, really, I'm surprised Julie Taymor hasn't done more, because I thought Titus was an audacious. She'd been very successful in theater. This was her first film. She later went and did Across the Universe. I'd like to see her do more, but I think Steve is right when he says
you can mention West Side Story. Sort of
you certainly can.
Or Strange Brew.
That's true. Oh my God!
Odd little adaptation of Hamlet. But
oh my goodness!
Yeah, I think Baz Luhrmann's William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Romeo plus
William
Juliet.
Shakespeare.
Yeah, I think so too.
I'll go along with it. A little reserved, but I'll go along with it.
It's the film that introduced so many people to Shakespeare. I mean, I think that if you remember in the 90s when it came out, I mean, there was a whole generation that suddenly fell in love with Shakespeare because it was a big mainstream success. It then spawned movies like Moulin Rouge and a bunch of other things that in that vein. And it was a very hyperkinetic work of cinema. It definitely wasn't a moribund stage play. And there had been adaptations that were very successful, Romeo and Juliet in the past, Olivia Hussey back in the late 60s, and Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, which the music is I think more iconic or more well known now than the movie. But it really was something we hadn't seen before.
But we do have an abundance of riches for Friday.
We do.
But I'll go along with.
I can go with that.
Luhrmann.
For sure.
So Monday,
Akira Kurosawa's Ron.
Tuesday,
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Wednesday,
Kenneth Branagh's Henry V.
Thursday, it's Richard III, and Friday, it's No Tears for Caesar. Oh no, it's Friday. Friday is Baz Luhrmann's, or John Carpenter's, Romeo and Juliet. Wow. Beware the Ides of March, but don't beware this great week of Shakespeare movies. It's a really strong week.
Take this opportunity to watch all of the stuff that we mentioned.
Yes.
Everything.
And all the things we'll be tweeting about.
And if you don't watch it today, you can watch it tomorrow.
And tomorrow. And tomorrow.
And tomorrow. Anything anybody wants to add? I mean, a lot of people struggling in English class right now, reading Shakespeare, and I think that stick with it because it bears great, rich rewards.
What I think should be said is that don't read Shakespeare, speak it. Read it out loud, because it takes on a life that when you hear it, it is much more real, and you will find the meaning in it much easier out loud.
I agree.
That's all I got to say.
Alice speaks the truth.
You speak the truth, my faithful Indian companion.
Oh my God!
Oh God!
Well,
oh man! Oh God!
We'll be back next Friday with an all-new episode of the 4:30 Movie, wherever you listen to podcasts, assuming you make it through the Ides of March and aren't stabbed in the back by somebody you admire and respect. Meanwhile, we hope you'll check out our sister shows, Inglorious Treksperts, the ultimate podcast for Star Trek fans with a life, and Disco Nights, a celebration of Star Trek Discovery, featuring host Chase Masterson as special guests. Meanwhile, if you want to check out previous episodes of the 4:30 Movie or purchase some of our great 4:30 Movie logo wear, you can go to 430movie.com or suggest future theme weeks or tell us how we screwed up on Twitter, 430 Movie Podcast, or Facebook at 430 Movie. And if you're feeling really generous, please go to Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars. Finally, a very special thanks to Bill Ritter and everyone here at Electric Studios. Natalie's back there somewhere, standing like Artie in front of the monitor, making sure we look good. And thank you for that. And last but not least, I know we have somebody here with a suggestion for a future episode of 430 Movie. So Isaac, come on up here and tell us, because we know you're our number one fan. You're a huge fan of the show, and that's true. What show, what week are you looking forward to having on the 430 Movie?
Wizard Week. Wizard Week.
Wizard Week. Wizard Week. What would be your pick for Wizard Week if you got a choice?
Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Harry Potter. Why? What's great about that movie?
A lot of action, good sorcery.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
The boy who lived come to die, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So Wizard Week. That's the one you want to see.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can do about that. I got a little pull over here. See what we can do.
Wizard Week.
And we got
is
some
neither
wizards.
early nor late.
And I got one more
It
question
arrives
for you.
precisely when it wishes.
I have one more question for you before we wrap up, young super fan. What's your favorite week of the 430 Movie?
War Movie Week.
War Movie Week. And why is that?
I just love War Movie Week.
You love war movies, yeah. And who's your favorite 430 Movie host?
It's Melching.
That's right. You don't have to answer. I know it is.
All right, you can say Steve.
It is Melching. So you can whisper it to me. No? Okay. That's fine. I'm not going to put you in a spot. Okay. Well, listen.
You're
So
smart-
can you
you're a
read
smart
this?
guy.
Can
You're a
you
smart guy.
read this to take us out here?
Until next week, on behalf of Stephen, Ashley, Darren, and Dad. Thanks for joining us here on the 430 Movie, and Eyewitness News starts now at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very
Is that
much.
PM or AM?
PM. Yeah, it's the local news. You wouldn't know anything about that. We hope you enjoyed our first season of the 430 Movie. We'll be in repeats for a few weeks, but don't worry, we'll be back for season 2 this spring for all new theme weeks. But for now, we hope you enjoy our special encore presentations from our first season. We'll see you back here in a few weeks.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. No tears, tears for Caesar. Evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones, so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men. Honorable men, honorable men. This was a man, this was a man.
This podcast is a production of the Electric Surge Network.